Hi everybody! In a few days it will be Halloween, whether you like it or not. So today I thought I'd send you a masterclass on how to paint a bunch of pumpkins. I love pumpkins, I grow them. I've got a couple out in the garden at the moment which are about the right size for carving, so we'll be picking those in the next couple of days and carving them. But I thought what I'd do is find a still life that we could work from. However, if you've got a garden and you've grown some of your own pumpkins and even some other autumnal vegetables like marrows or squash or any of those things, you could sort of compose your own little still life to work from. So you don't necessarily have to follow this picture, although this picture is really nice, and that's the one that I'm going to follow for this week's masterclass. Okay, so like I said, if you fancy going out and picking your own, or even if you've bought some pumpkins or whatever, then obviously looking at the real thing again is a great thing to have in front of you, especially for the drawing part. Otherwise you can use this. Okay, so we're going to use water mixable oils, and I've got some here, and these are a substitute for traditional oils which involve lots of solvent usage, which irritates a lot of people, either on their hands or in their eyes or whatever. So these were designed primarily for people who enjoy painting with oils but don't want the irritation of them and also the cleaning of them. These have been changed slightly so that they can be mixed with water, but more importantly that they can be cleaned up using water. Alright, so I'll go through the usage of these in the next stage. If you haven't got these, then you don't need to go out and buy them. You can, if you fancy having a go at them. My recommendation is that you go and buy yourself a tube of black and a tube of white, and you work with those two colours for a short period and see if you like the feel of them. If you like working with oil, then it's a really good substitute, and the main benefit is that it has a longer drying time, so you can blend much more easily. So they're much more forgiving, but they also have their issues. So as with everything, you know, they have pros and cons. So like I said, they do stock these in places like the Range and Hobbycraft art shops online. But if you just buy a couple of tubes rather than buying a whole set, because they're not cheap, and just play with a tonal image and see how you go. And if you like them, then you can go and buy yourself a whole set. They also do an additive now, which comes in a jar similar to that, which you can add to your traditional oil paints, and that makes them into water mixable oils. Again, it's quite expensive, but if you've got a lot of traditional oils hanging around that you've not been able to use because you don't like the solvents, or for whatever reason, then it's a really good alternative is to add this liquid to your traditional oils, and then it makes them into these. Alright, so I hope you enjoy watching me paint this and that you get an idea of how good they are, and hopefully you'll have another medium to work with that is a little bit, a lot of acrylic painters get very frustrated with the fact that the blending is very difficult because the acrylic paint dries before they can blend it. So this is a good alternative. Alright, so the next time you see me, you'll we'll have done the drawing bit and we'll be moving on to the painting bit. Okay, see you in a bit. Okay, so I have got a sheet of oil painting paper here. If you haven't got paper, then you can use canvas, as long as it's suitable surface for acrylic or oils. So it can be a piece of paper or a canvas or board or something like that. I've also got some clean water. I've got a range of rounded brushes and one square one. I've got a paper plate for mixing my colours on, and then I've got my colours. Okay, I've also got a rag. The rag is for wiping excess paint off your brushes. Now, with water mixable oils, you need to use this, which is oil painting medium. Use this to make your paints more fluid. Ideally use this and don't use water. However, if you haven't got this, you can use water, but just be aware of the fact that the water affects the colour of the resulting work. Okay, so it waters it down. That's one thing that it does. So it thins it down, and as it dries, it'll dry darker. So as the water evaporates, the colour you've mixed will dry darker. So just be aware of that when you're painting. This, however, doesn't. Okay, so like I said, if you haven't got it, water mixable oils are water mixable, as they say on the tube, but the recommendation is that you use the medium provided rather than the water, and use the water to clean your brushes and do things like that. Okay, so for the background, we're going to, this pumpkin is blue, these pumpkins here are blue, we've got orange. So I'm going to do like almost like a purple tone background. So if you haven't got water mixable oils and you are painting in acrylic, you can just follow the same method that I'm going to use here, but rather than using obviously water mixable oil medium, you just use water with your acrylics. Okay, and just be aware of the fact that the acrylics dry quicker, so you want to make sure that you've got all your things ready so that when you come to paint, you are not waiting for not spending time mixing paint, etc., while your paint on your canvas is drying. So just make sure that you've prepared things a little bit more than you would normally do, so that you're not interfering with the drying time of the acrylic. All right, so I've got on my paint palette, I've got purple and white. Now what happens if you don't have purple? So purple is a good mix is to use, especially with acrylic, and if you haven't got a wide range of colours for water mixable oils, you can get a good purple using ultramarine. And let me write this down on my palette, that would be useful, wouldn't it? So ultramarine and alizarin crimson. Okay, so that's if you haven't got purple, which, you know, you may or may not have. So rather than dunking my brush into the water here, I'm going to put it into the mixing medium. I'm just going to put a small amount onto my palette here, and I'm going to move it over, and I'm going to take a bit of the purple, and you can see how strong that colour is, right? And then I'm going to add some white into it to knock it back a bit, just to make it, and the white is very strong as well. You can see that that is so strong and powerful. Now what you need to do is assess how much colour you need to put on this. I'm going to put the purple here, you see, and that is just not enough. So I'm going to take more of the white, more of the medium, mix it together. So you'd be doing the same thing with acrylic or even watercolour, but instead of using the medium in water mixable oils, you use water for acrylic and water for watercolours. So I'm just using the medium to thin it down and mix it really, really well. Okay, so there's the colour. I'm quite happy with that colour, so I'm going to carry on with that, and I'm going to paint around the background here. All right, so what is different with water mixable oils, like I said, is that you can be a little less stressed by it, as in it paints on and it stays wet. I mean, I'm using it quite thinly here, but this will stay wet for most of the day at this thickness. However, if it was thicker, then it would probably take a few days to dry, which means that you can work into it over time, which to some people is a real benefit. You know, you might come back and you decide, oh, actually, I don't like these this purple colour, so I'm going to change it slightly. I'm going to change the tone of it, and I'm going to add some more blue into it, or whatever you want to do. Then you can still do that. Whereas with acrylic, you have to actually paint over it. So you have to mix up a different colour and paint over your initial colour completely. So yeah, that is very beneficial. This is going on quite nicely. And the most enjoyable thing about oils and water mixable oils is the fact that you get this sort of creamy consistency with it. And that's what most people miss when they try acrylic painting, is that sort of beautiful creamy consistency that the oil gives the paint. So this is a really good solution. I mean, I'm working with this now. There's absolutely no odour to it. And, you know, especially if you're working at home, in the house, or in a small space, ideally, you know, you wouldn't have something that smells. Even if you're not irritated by it, somebody else might be irritated by it. And it's also a smell that hangs around, you know. That's the traditional oil smell. So you may or may, I mean, I really like the smell of it. But I know that lots of people don't. And also I know that it does give you headaches if you have it around you for long periods of time. So yeah. Okay, so we're there. Pretty much there with the purple. Okay, now if you wanted to, you could add extra bits of colour in here. So if you wanted to sort of not have it so flat, I'm not saying that you have to do this, but you can see now by now that if that was acrylic, it would have dried off, right? Which means that you wouldn't be able to blend it like I'm doing here. So all I've done is I've added a little patch of purple, and I'm just sort of changing the tone as it goes across the picture to make it slightly darker. Can you see? And there's no reason why, if you like brush marks, that you can leave marks, you know, because it makes for a really nice dynamic image if you have some brush marks in the painting. All right, so that is again entirely up to you and your personal taste. as to how sort of textural and varied this background becomes. All right, but that's quite nice, isn't it? And remember, you can work into it again. So what do we do over here? So I think I'm going to put a darker patch here, and I'm just going to use the solid, almost straight purple. I've still got, one of the things you've got to remember when painting with oils is the brushes carry a lot of oil paint. So it's all right if you're working with the same colour, but if I was to change colours, I need to make sure that that brush is absolutely spotlessly clean before I move on to something else. But because I've decided to use the same colour, that is the purple, then there's not a huge issue there. So again, you can see how, I mean, I don't know whether you can see it via this film, but you can see how creamy and luscious this paint is, and how different. I mean, you may have used this before, so you might understand, but it is a different feel. It has a different feel to it. So in the same, in that final corner there, I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber to my palette. And on a painting of this scale, this is probably 2/3 the size of A4. And so I'm just going to add a little bit of the burnt umber into that purple mix. Keep adding the medium and squish all the paint off your brush. Can you see there's loads of paint near the ferrule? That's the metal part of the brush. Make sure you've got it all mixed in, because otherwise it'll show lines in your work. So again, into that corner with this paint. I haven't mixed a great deal here because we only need it for this square, so hopefully I've got enough. So in there, into that corner. Oh, I'm using I probably didn't mention it earlier, but I'm using a square brush here because I'm painting squares and rectangles. I find it helpful to use a square brush. So there we go. Right, so we've got our tonal background. Now what we're going to do down here, I think I'm going to put it on a lighter surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take up the rest of the white that I squidged out. I'm going to add a little bit more of the medium into it. There, that's a lovely colour, look. So that it's still got a little bit of purple in it because I've got purple on my brush head with burnt umber and white. And I've got quite a lot of it because I need it to go over that whole area. I've got a bit of medium in there to thin it down, not water, remember. I haven't added any water at all yet. So this colour was a little bit of purple and a bit of burnt umber and quite a lot of white. You can choose to do the background first or last. It's up to you. Some people are very methodical about how they paint different things. So watercolourists will do certain things, oil colorists will do certain things, acrylic painters tend to paint dark to light, watercolourists paint light to dark, and the background is another issue. So you know, it really is up to you and where you feel most comfortable. But, you know, make a decision. A lot of people who paint with oils will start with the main subject and then finish with the background. But I like to do it this way around, mainly because you end up with a very clear silhouette of what you're working on. But that doesn't mean to say that I won't go back in afterwards and fiddle about with the background and enhance it to match the subject. So it's up to you. It doesn't really matter in this case, really, which one you start with. Oops. So just push the paint up to the edges. You don't have to be too precise because we are going to paint over. Make sure you cover all your gaps. I'm going to leave the background reasonably pale, plain should I say, because I want the pumpkins to stand out. So to get into the fiddly parts, sorry, there's just a helicopter going over. I'm just going to take some pigment off my brush here, and I'm just going to go in with a smaller brush just to fill in these fiddly parts here. Okay, so that's the background. And the other thing to mention is that when you're painting with acrylics on your brushes, you don't have to wash them off immediately. With acrylic, if you leave the acrylic brush on the side with a bit of acrylic paint on it, it will dry off and that's it. That's the end of your brush. Whereas with these water mixable oils, because this paint is water mixable and not acrylic, you can leave this for a few minutes. You don't have to wash it off, so you can have a bunch of brushes with paint. I wouldn't leave them for days on end, but for today I've just used this little brush to fill in this area here. I'm not going to bother washing this off just yet because I might use that colour again, so I'm just going to leave it to one side. However, the square brush I'm going to use to paint the other pumpkins with, or I might use it. So what I've done is I've just washed it off in cold water, and I'm just going to dry it off on a rag. But just make sure you get absolutely every single bit of paint off of it, because otherwise that will affect the next mix that you're making. Okay, so far I've used these colours. So we've got burnt umber, purple, white. All right, I've mixed these range up. I've got a little bit of purple left there. I might incorporate that into something later, but don't squeeze out too much paint. However, this will stay wet for a few days. And I also put a bit of cling film over the top just to ensure that it stays completely wet. It will last on a palette for about a week, but no more than that. So just be very careful. All right. Now then, so the next stage is orange. So actually, no, what we'll do is we'll paint the white pumpkin that's in the background. Now the white pumpkin is not quite white. If you squint, it's it's not white. So we're gonna make it like a creamy colour, and what I've got is a yellow ochre. Okay, and I'm just going to put a really small dot of that into the white just to set it as an off white. Okay, so we've got our white. I'm going to revert to a round brush because we're painting round objects, so not a square brush. I'm going to use some of the medium. Just put a couple of dots on there and pick up some of the white, add a really small amount. Look how strong that is. So we're definitely going to need more white. So keep adding the white until you're happy. I think I'm going to put a touch of brown. So I'm just picking up a bit of that burnt umber that I had left over, just to sort of knock it back a bit. That yellow, because that yellow ochre is very strong. So there, I'm quite happy with that colour. If you want it to be lighter, just add more white to it. Okay, so we've got an off-white here, and we're just going to paint this in now. So in with the white, all the way along that edge. Your paint, will go on much better if you've got a good mix. So mix it well, make sure you've got enough medium in it to go on smoothly. If it's breaking up on you, that means that the mix is not good. On that brush there's so much paint there that really you should be able to paint so much of this pumpkin all at once without having to go back and pick up more paint. You can see that it's covering really nicely, and that it's not too thick and it's not too thin, that it doesn't paint on well. Make sure you go up to the edges really nicely. Now, the pumpkin is this shape. So go straight and then into a slight curve. Can you see how I'm painting? If you paint to the contours of the object that you're painting, then you'll find that your objects make more sense. Okay, so you can see that I mixed up a little bit too much paint there. With acrylic, unless you scrape it off and put it into a pot, it's not going to survive. With this, it will last. You may be able to use it in another painting. But I'm just going to get off as much as I can off my brush onto the palette before I wash this out to do the next one. All right, so I'm just going to wash it out in water and then dry it off on a rag and really look closely, where are we, at the brush, and make sure that all the pigment is off. Okay, right, so the next colour is, here we go, we'll go with the blue, because the blue, if you squint, the blue is paler than the orange. So I've got a little bit of cerulean blue here. You could use cerulean blue or cobalt blue. And what I'm going to do actually is use a bit of this pigment that's excess left over, or you can use white to mix into this blue. A bit more medium. And because I've got 3 or 4 pumpkins there to mix enough paint for, I'm just going to take a little bit more medium. I need to make sure that I've got enough. I'm just going to mix in a bit more blue. Make sure you put your lids back on really well with this water mixable paint. Rotate the brush again to get all the paint from the ferrule end of your brush. Now we're not too bad there, but it's still not quite dark enough. So I'm just going to put another blob, one more blob of blue into that pigment. It's touch more medium. Yeah, that's about right. Okay, squish your brush. Can you see all the white pigment coming from the top of the brush? Turn it around. There, okay. So let's paint these blue ones now. Ooh, feather appeared. I'm going to rotate the brush and wipe some of the excess pigment off into the middle of the pumpkin, and then begin to fill this area in. Oh, it's just started to rain. And because we're coming down to this one and this one, I might as well just paint straight over into that area. So again, fill it in first. Fill that colour in. Like that. Fill it in, block it in. And then once you've got all your paint onto your pumpkins, you can then sort of smooth things out, paint in lines, all that sort of thing. Right, so there it's on. Okay, so remember, paint with the contours. There's a little bit of paint coming off there. I don't know whether you can see that. So I'm just going to add some more pigment. You don't want it to be transparent, this paint. Make sure you've got enough paint on that you can't see any of the paper underneath. And then this one, again, go with the contours. So it goes round like this from the centre. Same with the other one. Like that. Put a little bit more pigment on this one because it's not covering the stuff that's underneath. Okay, so that's that one. So now all we need to do is our orange. So again, I've cleaned my brush off. I'm wiping it off with a rag, and I'm going to go in with the orange. So I've got, oh no, that's not the right one. Somewhere in my palette, I used to have orange. Do I still have it? Or maybe I don't. Ah, right, okay, so I seem to not have my orange with me. Maybe it's at work. Okay, so I've got cadmium yellow hue and cadmium red hue. Okay, so if you haven't got orange, then you need to use these two colours to mix an orange. Excuse me. That cadmium yellow hue is actually quite orange. You can see here, that's a cadmium yellow hue and that's a cadmium red hue. So I'm going to start with, always start with a lighter colour when you mix in colours. Start with the yellow and add a touch, tiny, look, see how powerful that is. If I'd have put loads of paint in there, I would have had too much excess paint. So go with your colour mixing, go slow. All right, so that's the orange. So I'm going to paint this one first. Now you might find with your orange that it's slightly more transparent. Colours that have got yellow mixed into them tend to be fairly transparent. So it might be that you have to put 2 coats of this on here until you get the right mix for your painting. You can see it's a bit transparent. I'm just filling this in like that. Just get the paint on to your pumpkin. Also, the amount of medium you add will have an impact on the transparency of your colour. So the less medium you can add, the better really. I've got a flick of purple there. So this can come all the way around here. Down here. And into this pumpkin here. If you feel like you need a smaller brush, then use a smaller brush. Don't fiddle or make mistakes because your brushes are too big for you. Okay, so I'm just going to add a touch more paint into this so it thickens it up a bit. I've got a lot of medium on there. And then I'm going to work into these colours. So go with the, like I said, go with the shape of the object that you're painting. Like this. I'm going to need some extra colour around these edges because the purple is showing through a bit. So again, paint to the contour of the object, like that, until you've got enough paint on your objects. Okay, so there you go, that's the orange bit done for now. Again, wipe any excess off on your palette and then clean your brush. Now we're going to go in and we're going to paint the stalks. So I'm just going to use the burnt umber that I've got there. And I've got a small brush. This is an old acrylic brush. And that's the other thing to remember with these water mixable oils. Make sure you use brushes that you're not going to use for anything else, even acrylic, unless you're going to really be very vigilant about cleaning. It's best to keep brushes for certain things. So if you've got water mixable oils, have water mixable oil brushes, which can be acrylic brushes or oil brushes, but keep them for those. Put them in a pot, label it water mixable oil brushes. Because if you move between mediums with brushes, you tend to have problems, mainly because the brushes deteriorate so much. So I always have a pot of brushes for my acrylics, a pot of brushes for my watercolour. And then you'll find that you don't have to go buying so many brushes all the time because they get damaged. Now you might find that these stalks are a little bit thick or too dark, this colour, but remember we can paint into them because we're using water mixable oils. Two of the small, I've got a hair coming off my brush there. I don't know if you can see that. Try and pull it off. Yeah, got it. Right. Oh no, I didn't get it, look. Make sure if you've got any hairs coming off your brush that you get them off, because they will cause problems You can still see it. There. Oh, there it goes. Right. Little stalk there, little stalk there, one there. Have we got any on others? Yeah, we've got a sort of darker section there, but we can't see the other one, can we? No. Okay, that's brilliant. So that is the main blocking in section of this masterclass. So get yourself to this stage, and then the next stage will be to put detail on. All right, enjoy yourself. It's a really nice medium. Take your time, work larger if you want to. We'll look at shadows in a minute, and we'll look at adding texture and highlights. Okay, so this has been left for a week because I've been away on holiday. Had a great time, went round the whole of the coast of Wales. It was lovely. So this has been left and it's now dry. However, it will move a little bit because this is water mixable oils. As soon as you put wet surface back onto this paint here, it will move a little bit. So you can blend and you can remove and do all that sort of thing. On my palette, I've got some paints that are still wet from a week ago because I had the palette covered with cling film. But I've squeezed out a bit of extra stuff. So I've got some titanium white here and some cadmium yellow hue, which is quite orange actually. And I've got some cadmium red here that's still wet. And I put a little bit of alizarin crimson here, and I'm going to use the alizarin crimson to mix up a dark orange with the cadmium yellow, and then I'm going to use a bit of white to lighten it up, and I'm just going to paint this one pumpkin here so that you can see how to finish it, how to do the details, and then you just replicate the same technique with the other ones, but obviously using blue here and white and a bit of creamy colour here. I made the creamy colour with a bit of white mixed with a bit of burnt umber, and then I'll deal with the backgrounds. But I'll paint this one, and then you can just copy the same technique for each of the others, and then I'll put that on time lapse so that I can finish that, and then I'll show you a bit of the background, how to finish that, and then hopefully you can get on with things. I'm using small brushes. I've got a round Winsor & Newton special value brush here. It's a size 1. And I've also got a detail brush. This is an Atlantis detail brush, both for oils or acrylics, and this is a number 6. But it's got a very fine point on the end, so I should be able to do detail with that. Remember that acrylic or oil brushes generally are long handled and they tend to be white in the main, but you will get the odd one that's brown. Okay, so the only other things I've got here are my water mixable oil medium, which is what I water down my paints with, and then I've got a pot of water to clean my brushes. I've also got a rag for cleaning stuff. And I've got my image here to refer to. Okay, so first of all we need to decide which direction the light is coming from, and it's not very clear on this picture where the light is coming from. It seems to be slightly darker on the right hand side, so I'm going to imagine that the light is coming from the left, and I always find it a real benefit to actually put a mark somewhere. So over on the other side of the paper here, which is the cover, I put a directional mark to remind me which way the light is coming from. So everything on the left hand side would be lighter than what's on the right hand side. So the right hand side is in shadow. Okay, so just put a mark somewhere, even if it's on the table, to denote where you're going to go with the shadows and the highlights. And we're going to do the highlights first. So I've got a bit of white, like I said, and a bit of the cadmium yellow hue. You can follow the same colour mixes if you're just doing acrylic paint. So just mix a little bit of the mixing medium, the water mixable oil medium. I mean, obviously you don't use that if you're using acrylic, you just use water. And put a little bit of that cadmium yellow hue into that white. Now you can see the white is quite strong, so I'm going to add a bit more, probably not that much, but water mixable cadmium yellow hue into that white, and a bit more of the mixing medium. Mix it well, make sure the top of the brush, where the paint is at the top, is also mixed in just by turning your brush like this. So then you don't get different shades. Okay, so that's one, that's the lighter tone. That'll be your middle tone, and then we need to mix a darker tone. So I'm going to take some of that, move it over there, add some medium, mix it well. There is a little bit of white left on my brush there, but I'm going to mix some alizarin crimson, right? If you haven't got alizarin crimson, then, and you can see that's too dark, again, I've added too much paint. So I'm going to put some more of the yellow back in. Keep mixing until you get the right tone that you want. That's getting a bit better now. Alright, so now you've got a dark orange. I'm just going to need to squeeze out a little bit more of that middle, that cadmium yellow hue for the middle tones. Okay, so again I'll just wipe off the rest of that. I'm just going to mix this up a bit because it's a bit dry, just by adding a little bit of the medium. Okay, so make sure all your colours are ready in advance and that they're well mixed like that. Okay, and then off you go. So the best thing to do is always to work light to dark. So pick up a little bit of that lighter tone and just get it onto your pumpkin. And this is where you can really crisp up edges, because you're putting a second coat on effectively. You can really get those wobbly edges sorted. So we need a highlight. So this is your highlight. There, you can see that the colour, and if it's not light enough, then just add a little bit more white. And we're going to, because this is an acrylic or a water mixable oil painting, we're going to leave brush marks in place, right? That's all part of the texture of the paint. If you want it to be smooth, then you smooth it out. But I'm going to, and you just do that by repeatedly brushing over your lines and adding more paint. Alright, but I like the brush marks, so I'm going to use the brush marks in the direction of the pumpkin. So that's the middle tone, sorry, the light tone. This is now the middle tone. I'll put it around the base of the stalk there, and then I'm going to work it in, blend it with the lighter tone, and then obviously into the darker tone. Right down to the bottom, crisp that edge up like I said. Use the right size brushes, and you shouldn't go far wrong. Leave some of the marks in, but go straight here. But as you go out to the curved areas of the pumpkin, then curve the mark you're making. You see how that works? Very subtle, but really successful. So we're going with this darker orange, right around the edge, crisp up that edge again, get enough paint on, must have lots of paint, don't scrimp on the amount of paint that you put on these paintings. It's very different to watercolour. We want to see the paint. So around the edge there, make it nice and crisp. I know pumpkins are bumpy and lumpy, so you know, we don't mind a few bumps and lumps. You will have seen lots of them in the supermarkets and the shops at the moment, so hopefully you will have got to know the shapes and the colours and the different types well. So as you get over to the mid-tone orange, this is where you have to start to blend. And the benefit, like I said, the enormous benefit of this water mixable oil is the fact that it's still wet. You may, with the acrylic, find that that has dried out a bit, and if it has, then it means you're not using enough paint. So make sure that you put enough paint on. If you put loads of paint on, it doesn't dry out so quickly because it's thicker, so it makes sense to put more paint on so it gives you more time to blend. Okay, so that's that stage. Again, repeat it with all the others. You want a light, a middle and a dark tone of whatever colour you're using there. Okay, I'm going to do these on time lapse so it's quicker. By the time we've done those, I can come back and I can just put some very delicate lines into these areas where it's dried off ever so slightly, and I will then talk about how to do the background. Okay. Okay, so I've got the lights, the middle tones and the darks on each one of these pumpkins, and I've just mixed up a darker blue to put the dark lines on the blue pumpkins, and I've just mixed up a dark orange to do the lines on the orange pumpkins, and I've also treated the stalks in the same way. So I've got the dark burnt umber on the left, and then I've got a slightly lighter burnt umber on the right, and I've just mixed the lines together, blended the lines together. So now I need a burnt umber colour to do the lines on the larger pumpkin, which I've already got. I've just mixed a bit of burnt umber there with a bit of white. Alright, you don't want it too dark, so make it nice and light. Make sure you've got lots of medium mixed into it. I'm using the finer brush that I showed you earlier on, size 6. It's got a nicer point on it than the other one. You can see that's slightly rounder than this one. It's got a pointed tip on it, which will help you to make these lines much more precise. So start on the left. If it's wet, you can wait for it to dry, but I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to start at the top, and I'm going to just work my way round with the colour. Don't worry if it breaks up. It's actually better if it breaks up. Can you see how it's gone thick, then thin, then thick? That's better. It will give a much more natural result. And then you need to, so you're curving with the pumpkin, so make sure that you observe the way those curves are on the pumpkin before you start putting any marks on. And you haven't got any pencil marks to follow either, so go slow. However, if you make a mistake, you can always paint it out, wipe it off and try again. So just go with, make sure that you're always going with the curve of the pumpkin Don't go straight until you get to the middle bit, and then you can straighten the lines up a little like that. Okay, so there are your pumpkins more or less finished. I have got a couple of spots where there are highlights on the pumpkins, so I'm just going to mix up for the blue ones, particularly a very light blue colour like this, almost white. Like that. And I'm just going to put a couple of highlight spots, and actually that stalk there is like a lighter tone, so if you wanted to do the stalk lighter, then go ahead. But I'm just going to put a couple of sort of lighter flashes just on these ones here. Keep picking up the white because your brush will pick up what's underneath. Here, mainly because these are in the foreground, you can get away with putting some more detail on them, but don't overdo it. So in the same way that you've put the sort of white, the darker lines on, you can put some lighter lines on, and you can repeat that with the orange and the lighter tone. Just mix up a much lighter tone of the orange like that. It's actually not as evident on the orange pumpkins as it is on the bigger ones, the blue ones, but this one here has definitely got a lighter flash there. There's a couple of little marks, oops, wrong colour, there, and on that curve there. I'll put a little dash on the back there. Should we put some somewhere else? Let's put a little bit there and a bit there, a bit there. So you can, you know, you can sort of add more and more detail if you want, but as with watercolour, less is more. The more detail you go into, the less sort of painterly it looks, really. I always try and avoid doing too much. Okay, so there's the pumpkins done. So now we're going to talk about, I'm just going to lift this up a touch. Alright, so I'm happy with those now. So with regard to the background, it is just a matter of getting a larger brush, which I haven't got at the moment, and I'm going to use square brushes because they're squares. So I've got two size of square brushes there, and I'm just going to use the same or similar colours to what I've got here, and I'm just going to make these areas a little more crisp. You can see that some of the paint is showing through in patches. So we went for this colour. So this was a burnt umber up here, burnt umber, and to make it a little bit richer, because it's a bit dull, that is, I'm going to put a little bit of that alizarin crimson into it. And you need to make sure that it's thick enough, right? Even though we've only got a small patch there, I'm just going to put a dot more burnt umber into it. The burnt umber has a reddy tone to it anyway, so you would get that with just the burnt umber. But like I said, if you fancy putting a bit of colour into it, then just put in. And I'm going to be quite loose with this now. I'm going to paint the edges so they're really crisp without trying to knock my microphone like that. And then I'm going to be quite loose with the application of paint. I want to see some marks. I'm going to put a little bit of solid alizarin crimson into that middle section there. Okay, so really have a bit of fun with the application of paint. Don't leave it perfect. All right, clean off your brush. We're going to mix that purple tone, and for the purple, in fact, I have a purple ready mixed, dioxazine purple. I find it difficult to say that. But if you haven't got a purple, then you can mix alizarin crimson and ultramarine, and you'll get this purple or something similar to that. All right, mix it down with a bit of your medium, and we're going to pop this in. I'm going to leave this purple as it is because I like the colour of it. And again, I'm just going to paint around the edges carefully. Really be careful when you come to your pumpkin. But it is an opportunity to again crisp up those edges by your pumpkin. Quite often painters will leave backgrounds unpainted, especially in portraits, and they use the background colour to just sort of solidify the edges of their subjects. So again, make sure you put a decent amount of paint on there, and then we come down lower, and the lower bit is a little bit of this and a little bit of this mixed together with a bit of white. So I'm going to put the purple back into that mix that I've mixed with the burnt umber and the alizarin crimson, and then I'm going to take some of this white, put it over there. Oops, just knocked the microphone. Mix it well, and we need quite a lot of this because we've got to cover the base of underneath the pumpkins. So make sure that you've mixed enough up. Where's the burnt umber gone? I think I've run out of burnt umber. Put a bit more white in it. And I'm going to take some more burnt umber. You can see how the burnt umber sort of knocks back that purple tone and makes it less bright, which is a good contrast with the orange, because you want the orange to really pop. So don't go put in bright colours. I mean, you can, it's up to you, you decide. But obviously the orange will pop more if it's got this sort of dull colour around it than it would do if it had, say, red or a green or something like that. So I'm carefully painting around. If you feel you need to use a smaller brush in that area, go ahead. The smaller the brush, the more control you'll have of getting into those little tiny nooks to put your paint into. Don't go spoiling your beautiful pumpkins by not using the right tools. You can see how much paint I've got on the top of the brush there. I'm just going to sort of scrape it off and use it so I don't waste it. I'm going to take a smaller brush and go into this area here because I don't want to make a mistake. Again, leave your brush marks nice and fluid. If you've got any bits, pick them off, like that bit there. I'm just going to use the rest of the paint on this brush though to finish this section. Thing with using a bigger brush is that you can get nice even sweeps of colour in. So smaller brush. Now you could go in with your detail brush that you were using before, but just make sure it's clean. Oops. I'll make that a bit lighter than I should do. Right, okay, so in here, because you've got your tone on underneath where we blocked in to begin with, this makes this job a lot easier than if you were working onto white paper or canvas. So that's why we block in to begin with, so that you can fill in without thinking, oh god, I've got all that white, and there's patches poking through. So that is a really good tip for starting a painting, is the blocking in process that we looked at earlier. Okay, so that's that done. So now we've just got this section. I'm going to turn my painting upside down just because it's easier to get at these angles in here. And again, I'm going to use a purple and a white. So I've got my purple there. I'm just going to, I've spilled some medium here, so I'm on my table, so I'm just going to scrape it up and just wipe it, and then I don't have to worry about it. Right, there we go. Right, so into that we want to put some white, and again you need a lot of colour there. Take some more white and lighten it up a bit. You need to get it more or less the same tone as what we've got there. A bit more white. Again, if your colours vary, don't worry. But like I said, don't make them too... The reason why we chose the purple in the first place is because it's a good contrast colour to... complementary colour to the orange. And seeing as the orange is the main colour in the painting, that's what we went for. So it's a complementary. So again, carefully round those edges. Like that. Lean on your hand if you have to. If you feel like you need to use a smaller brush, then do so. Leave your brush marks in, leave patches of paint. I'm going to put some darker, almost solid purple in places here, but I am going to add some more white to that so it's like what's underneath. Again, wipe all the paint off your brush, get it on the tip of your brush when you're doing edges, and keep adding to the tip, because then you'll get a more consistent line. So I'm going back, I'm using this almost like a palette into the edge, around the stalk. I'm going to use a smaller brush in there because I can't get this brush in that section. Again, dynamic brush strokes, just leave them rough. Much more interesting to the eye. Rub off all your paint on your brush and then go in like that. So hopefully you'll have chance to do this in time for Halloween, and then you'll have a Halloween themed painting that you can put on your wall or on your mantelpiece or whatever, or you could even send it as a gift to somebody who loves Halloween. Right, okay, so I'm going to use my smaller detail brush just to get in these bits here. Steady hand. I mean, I'm doing this on quite a small piece of paper. It's smaller than A4, so you know, if you had a larger space, a larger piece of paper to work on, these little bits wouldn't be as fiddly. So you choose the size. You can also add bits and bobs of other things in, you know, if you've got other sort of harvest, autumnal objects, if you don't like Halloween, or you know, other kinds of pumpkins, conkers. We did conkers recently, didn't we? Then add those in, you know. You could put leaves on these pumpkins. Right, so you don't have to just stick rigidly to what I'm showing you all the time. Right, let's get this straightened up. Right, okay, so the only thing we're lacking now is a little bit of shadow. So for the shadow, I'm just going to put that brush in some water. I'm going to take this colour that we mixed here, which is this colour here, and I'm just going to add a touch of red into it, like that. Ooh. Okay, and I'm just going to pop some shadows underneath. Now if you want it to be darker, then you can add some more blue in it or whatever, but just make sure that it is darker than the surface that you're painting it onto. And I'm just going to pop in, again, make it nice and fluid, either with the medium for water mixable oils or with water for the acrylic. And you're just going to pop in some darker patches just in amongst those. And can you see how, because I've mixed a purple and I haven't used black, that shadow is now much more interesting than it would be if it was black. So don't use black. Mix some colours to make a darker tone of whatever you're painting onto, but try and avoid adding black. Black just deadens everything. So you could use a red, a dark brown, you could use a bit of Payne's grey if you've got Payne's grey, but all of those pumpkins will benefit from having just a bit of shadow just to ground them, like that. Can you see? And the other thing you can do is also put some darker, let's just add a little bit. So I've just taken a dot of the whiter, lighter tone that I've got here, and you can mix up a shadow colour to go up and onto the pumpkins themselves. So around where the pumpkins are touching, like this, there would be a shadow being cast onto those pumpkins like that. Can you see? So just mix up a slightly lighter shade of that purple and just put in, and this is still wet. You can see again the benefit of working with water mixable oils is you'll find that the colours are still wet and that you can blend, remove, do all of those things that you can't do with acrylic. So again, you can spend time doing this part if you want to, just by adding more and more colour to create some shadow effects. Alright, so there you go. That is more or less it finished. I don't want to do any more than that to it. I like the way it looks. If you need more detail, go into more detail. But I like really simple, almost sort of semi-abstract paintings. Something where you can see the brush strokes, where you can see the fact that the artist has had a hand in it, you know. It's really important that you don't reproduce something like a photograph. Okay, I will take a picture of this when it's dried, and I'll include that in the final message that I send to you. Enjoy! Happy Halloween, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful autumn and everything keeps growing and flowering and it doesn't get too cold. And please look after yourselves. I know that we're in lockdown again here in Wales, I think for another week or so. So please look after yourselves and stay safe. Cheerio!